really matters, not what is easy to measure. You have to be willing to stay the course. So these early transactions take time. It's about building partnerships. You have to invest, and there's capacity building in every organisation that takes part in this. And I think then the role of data, affordable, valuable data that is real time and allows people to continuously adapt on the ground is essential. And I think something we'll see growing the market is the availability of affordable data, of sort of better data. So with that, having talked for far longer than my slot, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Katy. Yeah, I think a couple of things that you said definitely I would just re-emphasize. I think the impact measurement of this component, I mean, that's one thing about this instrument that's very specific to this instrument. And then the other thing is that there are many forms of it, which I think is the key, and I think a lot of people tend to come up with or familiar with one instance or one example of it, and they think that, oh, that's exactly what impacting financing is. But the truth is that there are many flavors of that. It could be grant-based, it could be debt-based, and the instrument is, in some sense, fairly versatile and very flexible. So I think that's definitely something that I'd like to emphasize. But maybe we can turn to Neeraj. Neeraj, you are sort of the other side of this, and one advantage you have is you're the only petitioner on this panel from the ground perspective. Neeraj is from ISFC, Indian School Financing Company that lends to affordable private schools. And Neeraj recently, or last year actually, not so recent, is using an impact bond, an impact financing instrument within the organization. So Neeraj, it would be helpful to share with the audience how this instrument is being used by ISFC. What is the behavior change you're seeing on the ground, and what are your thoughts on this early pilot that you're doing?
Thank you, Rahil. See, first of all, I just would like to tell the philosophy of the company. The company philosophy started ourselves as a social impact investment, but keeping in mind that not only social impact we have to do, but nothing is sustainable if we are not making money. So first important thing is that we should make money, then only we can serve others. So if it is social impact, doesn't mean that we are an NGO. We can have profit also and serve the people also. We have a mission that we will serve the school. We lend to schools. So why we are lending to the schools? The mission was so that the quality of education improves to the student. Now we have limited profitability because of certain things. So we contacted MSDF, and MSDF that has agreed to help us in terms of achieving our goals. So these goals, which we would have done maybe 3-4 years later, we kind of preponed it by 3-4 years, and now we are serving those schools through impact measurement. Now, how the bond was structured? It's a non-convertible debenture, simple NCD. The rate of this NCD is floating, which is measured and which is linked to the impact assessment of schools if they achieve certain milestones. We would return back, say, 5% or 10% of their loan amount back to these guys. So we went to schools. We have identified close to 100 schools. Those 100 schools, we said, okay, we'll be doing 2 assessments. One at the time of granting you the loan, and 2 after 2 years, so that we can find out that is there any real improvement in the quality of education which you are imparting to the student. We have already done first assessment. The schools, they have taken this very well. Schools which were skeptical also, what's in there for you, kind of thing, but all kind of people. So this model for us, is very good. This has helped us in preponing number one. The school, and the kind of school which you are funding, they are affordable private schools. For them, improving quality of education is an expense. He doesn't want to listen expense. Now, if there are any organization who can help him, similarly, like MSDF helped us in terms of preponing our decision, again this money has helped those schools to prepone their decision of improving quality quality of education in their schools. We are hoping that with this kind of money, the quality of education definitely would improve. And this is a kind of habit formation. So once the habit is formed, it will be on a sustainable basis. People will track this. This kind of thing should happen more. I would say, one of the questions was why this is not sustainable. One of the reasons, in my opinion, is that the organizations who are funding this, like MSD, they have a mission. But say, for example, commercial banks, for example, NBFCs, the bigger NBFCs, they are not having as dedicated mission, I would say, as maybe say MSD or a similar organization. Or they are doing this under their CSR activities directly. So I would say these are the things which should be done, and maybe this was the first. I think we were the first company who have done this impact-linked NCDs bond in India. And that was the first which we did. And we are also waiting for it. So it's a pilot which we have done for 100 schools. Let's see the results, and we'll try to scale it up.
Thanks. I think you did a good summary, and just to connect to what Katy was saying, if I had to just connect some of those points, which is the instrument that Neeraj is talking about and Katy talked about is that the core concept is that there's a transaction and there's a financial payment linked to the outcome. And in Neeraj's case, that outcome is learning level outcomes in the affordable private schools that he's lending to. And the payment, the financial transaction there is, as he said, between 5 and 10%. So the schools achieve that outcome, they get 5 to 10%, which is the financial incentive for the school. Neeraj, one thing that I think would be helpful for the audience to also understand from your perspective is how difficult was this to do? So you said you're the first to do it. Always is the first to do something that's it's not necessarily trivial. So the thinking and the amount of investment that you and your team had to make, and what is your view on the difficulty around such something like this?
See, anything which we are doing for the first time definitely takes time. So that this is, I mean, a lot of things you have to, as far as structure is concerned, you have to make it legally sound. You have to make it cost-wise. You have to make it sound, etc. And there are a lot of procedures and formalities, etc. We have to take. But once in our particular case, I think we started speaking somewhere in, I would say, July, August, and we did the transaction in November. So I would say 1 or 2 months we were from discussion point to the end point, which will complete the transaction. Now, once this is has to be seen. Otherwise, as far as difficulty is concerned, I would say first is the one which takes highest. Later, I think gradually we start going down. In our particular case, I would say 7 days after the same.
Thanks, Neeraj. And I'll definitely come back to you with a few more questions. But I'd like to segue to Uttam. Uttam represents Janalakshmi over here and small finance bank. Now they're going to be a funder in the impact space as well. I think the advantage that someone like his perspective is very useful to see. How does a funder in this ecosystem think about this tool? What is your perspective on using this, and what your familiarity with this, and how do you see adoption, and what are the challenges around that, both from your perspective as well as the market?
Thanks, Rahil. This is a quick background. So I represent the public finance team of Janalakshmi, through which we are essentially trying to do corporate or enterprise debt for impact-linked enterprises. As Janalakshmi, most of you would know about Janalakshmi, we think about scale in everything that we do, right? So as a part of the entire program that we have, what we have done is we have made sure that our so-called interest margins are very limited in what we are doing, so that we can achieve scale. We don't try to structure every transaction in terms of what could be the specific outcomes. We are very clear about what we'll fund and what we'll not fund, and then we let the companies deliver what their objectives are. Our pre-process is fairly strong in terms of are we selecting the right partners, but once we do that, we generally monitor them more from a credit perspective rather than from an outcome perspective. Having said that, we are still an intermediary and we do not have the development fund. So the way I look at this entire model, there are essentially three parts of the puzzle. One is, players like MSDF, where you have kind of a development fund which can be used to support organizations like the schools which are being funded by ISFC. ISFC and us are in a way the intermediaries in between. And the question is, if we really want to make this whole thing scalable, can we use the intermediaries with a pre-structured set of parameters for, say, 3-4 specified sectors that we identify? Can we use the intermediaries to deliver this, or do we necessarily need to spend 3 months in one transaction? So that's a question that I believe that if you find the right impact, because I think Neeraj made a point that you have commercial banks, NBFCs, who may not necessarily, to the extent of impact, they just think about their CSR. That's not a part of the business model for them. However, for us, the team that I represent, we only practically do debt capital for companies which are in a way impact, right? So can it be structured in a way that certain intermediaries are identified? Because if you try to structure each transaction, the time that you have for doing a transaction is fairly limited. Like, you can't wait for one transaction to happen for about 4 or 6 month period. These have to be predefined and standardized. I know there are challenges in terms of the objectives and the actual outcome, but then you have to find the right partners, is probably what I would say, both in terms of the development funds finding the right intermediaries and the right intermediaries finding the right companies to fund.
Thanks, Uttam. I think that's definitely, to Neeraj's point, I think the first transaction is difficult to do, and if everybody tries to do this themselves, you're going to have a lot of high transaction costs. You can sort of you pool your resources, and I think this is kind of what social finance is trying to do, is set up these intermediaries, provide that technical capacity support, and then make it easier for an organization like Janalakshmi or other funders, whether they be foundations or commercial, to participate in this instrument.
Maybe I can just give you an example of kind of a structure that we can think of. So we do funding for affordable housing projects. The intent is that housing inclusion is basically the intent. So apart from the MFIs who fund the consumer for buying a house, we also fund developers who are focusing on affordable housing. Now, for a financing like that, what could be a possible structure? There's a very clear identification from the government that there's a subsidy which is given to people who actually are from a specific community, right? So the checks and balances are happening at the government's level, whether the subsidy goes to the right person or not. We can clearly define when we do a funding for a developer to incentivize him to sell only to the last mile people and not to the investors. As we know, a large part of the real estate at the end of the day gets sold to the investors. So can we have a certain parameter that, okay, if X percentage of your flats do get sold, the customers do get a subsidy from the government, which means it's been sold to the end consumer, your interest rates for the loan could be reduced by X percentage. So that could be a possible structure for a sector like affordable housing.
Yeah, I think I think the amount of identifying, I think to Katy's point earlier, which is making sure we have the right metric that we're talking about, and using government sort of standards helps a lot, because they definitely spend a lot of time coming up and thinking about what is the right frame and how do you identify the right target segment. So that could definitely be one way of identifying what metrics to use. Drew, you are advising the World Bank. The World Bank represents a very large pot of money. So I think, and as well, you've also advised a number of people on these instruments. So you have a lot of experience seeing these instruments, thinking about how they get structured. It'd be helpful for you to just speak about, a little bit about these financial structures. How can they be structured? What are the components of this? It'd be helpful for you to share that with the audience, and then maybe even go to some few specific examples of how these have been used, the results so far from this instrument.
Well, thank you. So I do bring a couple lenses. I will speak from a World Bank perspective, but also as the co-founder of one of the largest U.S. advisory firms on impact financings, I can speak kind of on the smaller level than just the mammoth World Bank big loans. So I'll try to bring it together. But also, hopefully, I can tie together the two questions or two sets of questions a little bit as we're doing it. I think the first thing to put in mind is why is this even happening, and what are we trying to solve other than creating more complexity? Because you've heard a lot about complexity in the three discussions for the moment. So one of the things, and I think it comes back to the second question that was asked, the second part of the first question, which was who funds these and why? What we're seeing is there's an emerging class of investors out there that do want to see some social benefit with the use of their monies. So to anyone that wants to be cynical these days about where the world is at, frankly, this is a really nice phenomenon that we're seeing, and we're seeing this from high net worth fund management firms to corporates. And then also there's a change happening at the philanthropic level where philanthropy now is recognizing, again, a little bit to your third part of your question about sustainability, is that traditional grants aren't getting them far enough to sustain organizations, and are there new ways of doing this? So what we're starting to see is structures, and I'll speak. I can speak from different markets, but I'll speak to the largest one that's been done in the U.S. to date to just give you a very concrete feeling. And this really comes back to the first question of yours, which is what are we solving it for? And what's the underlying impact? In this case, the largest one there was around an issue of social justice and young males going to jail way too frequently. Now, it's a very big issue in the developed countries, but what's relevant in there, and you can easily see transferable issues to developing countries, it's around purely a social outcome, which is how to improve the lives of young men in that case. And basically what it was, coming back to some of the points that Katy mentioned, which is working on the ground with an organization that was highly skilled at doing it, but could never get, and it's a nonprofit, it could never get the financing to do anything in scale. It just had to keep going to local governments and to philanthropies, and the way I refer to it is like with a little cup one year and a little bigger cup the next year and a slightly bigger cup the next year, hopefully always getting a little bit more money, but never getting enough to do the programs. So what they raised was $35 million to address in scale over 7 years a program that they had basically been band-aiding together. In terms of the capital structure, basically 3 forms of funds came in. As you've heard, this stuff is new, and whenever you're doing something new in financing, the uncertainties lead investors to be cautious about the structure. So we had to layer in some capital from the philanthropic side for that portion. And I'm sorry, let me step back. Basically, what we agreed over 7 years is they were going to improve the outcomes socially for these young people by 20% to 40% from what was the standard performance of where their lives would end up. And the funders would not get their money back unless we achieved those 20% worth of outcomes. And the government was willing to pay for it if it could happen, because for the government, in this case, they were getting better social outcomes for less money over that time period, because it's very expensive. If you can believe it, it costs $40,000 to live in a jail in the U.S. a year. So there's a lot of savings for the government to try to see better outcomes. So that's what they were structuring the funding for. And we basically layered it where we had philanthropy taking the highest risk portion of it, which was, could we get from 20 to 40%? And that was being taken by philanthropy because that's a higher risk portion of it. But a small firm around the globe called Goldman Sachs, in other words, a big investment bank, took the main risk component of this because they were, after they did their due diligence, were comfortable that this organization could achieve the outcomes that it set for, which was a 20% improvement in the lives of these young. And I can get into what we meant by improvements, but I think a little bit to your first question and a little bit what Katy was saying, whatever is measurable can be financed. So if somebody believes that it's a financial inclusion, to your question, financial inclusion is a very measurable set of things, and you can have different types of metrics, and in this case it was improvement in the lives as well as job employment. That was the second component of it, which were both, again, very measurable. So Goldman Sachs took the senior piece of the financing, and then we have a 7-year financing. And as we hit the certain metrics, government will pay out based on the performance of this over the time of it. And actually, without getting it too complex, the financing itself was only 35 million, but because of the way it's structured, it will affect about 50 million over time. Again, I don't want to get complex. Only the important point is, again, is it's leveraging capability, which is, again, one of the constraints on most philanthropic supports to it. So if I can come back to, again, the first question for anybody that is in the nonprofit world, these tools of impact financings were actually initially designed to solve for the lack of capital capacity that is there, and secondly, to fund a program to its completion. And the one thing that I will speak to every time I speak to you about this, the big change in all this from a organizational level is it's about data. We can't do this without legitimate data to say what's been accomplished. What traditionally happens, and again, I don't mean to pick on philanthropy because they do some wonderful things, is usually when you go and get money from a philanthropy, they give you money to fund a program, the delivery of the program, not the infrastructure to run a program well, i.e. data. And again, IBM and large corporates couldn't exist unless they had management teams running data and doing this. And so what's really important in all of this now is real-time management of programs. And that's where you can see what's happening at the school levels and housing is we can see the outcomes. And then what happens from there, from a program, the exciting thing from the programmatic level, and this is what we're seeing tremendously across the globe, is those organizations that had very little data and that just did their best they could, now daily, weekly, whatever, are seeing data and they can amend and change the program as they're running it, which is a huge change from the way we were at before. Because we would just once a year say, how many people did we serve? That was the best we could merge. Now we can say, did that child actually do well in their exam last week? Oh, no, they didn't. Well, what do we do? And we can react to it much more timely. So that's the other why we're doing this and why it makes sense. So it really does fit into it. And I don't want to speak to only nonprofits, but also it can be used tremendously well for for-profits. You'll hear a lot about how it works for for-profit housing or for-profit clean energy. I don't want to take much more time, but you did ask about financial inclusion and any innovative financings. We've been talking a lot about impact bonds or impact-type linkages. There are many other creative impact-linked issues. The one that immediately comes to mind for me is an organization we funded through the World Bank, which is down in Bangalore, Rangwala, which is doing crowdfunding financing for women that have not had financing before. So their metric is first-time financing for small businesses. And they're using crowdfunding as a tool with subsidies weaved into it so that it can be affordable for everybody. So there are different ways these things can be structured. And again, it's just an example of using crowdfunding where you can get a whole different population of people funding these things.
Thanks, Drew. Katy, I'd love to get your perspective also on, this discussion of the foundations in the room or crowdfunders in the room. Why should they use this instrument? You made a good, strong case for that. What is your perspective on that as well? Why should this, what is so cool about why use this?
It was interesting, we were doing a sort of due diligence and design session for an impact structure recently, and we've been working on this for months, and we were just hitting brick walls, and it was really tough. And so we decided to start the session by asking everybody, can we just remember why we started doing this? We're not doing this because it's the easy option. Why is this happening? And everybody went round, and the two funders, the two outcomes funders, so in one case a donor agency, the other a private foundation, the thing that they found was, although these meetings were tough, and compared to giving a traditional grant or awarding a contract, they couldn't believe how much time this was taking and how much they were having to think about things. But they could actually see the value of that process. So for them, actually engaging with the issue area, where are the barriers, hearing the service providers on the ground, give them their perspective, and really, we would be asking them, why are we having so much trouble defining the outcomes? Why can't we price them? You've been programming in this area for 15 years. And the fact that they didn't have an answer was the justification for them to continue using this structure. You may, when you're thinking about impact-linked financing, there's an interesting question around what a definition of success is. Is a program successful if they don't pay out? the program is a failure and after 12 months you have to terminate it. And we've seen an example of that in the US. Clearly from the target population you wanted to work with, that's been a failure. Nobody would want that to happen. But actually in terms of the learning, that was stopped and the lessons were learned and shared. In a traditional programming approach, a grant would be given. There would be some understanding of the funds that had gone out of the door and some understanding of some of the metrics that had been achieved, but would there have been the transparency and accountability of outcomes? Probably not. So to me, that's the most compelling argument, and that's what I've heard from the funders themselves. From a financial perspective, clearly the fact that you're probably only paying if this is successful. You don't have to monitor budgets, you don't have to check log frames, all of these things that are financially compelling, but actually the real value has come from the change and the shift in mindset that's come through the organizations.
Neeraj, why don't you get, you're the ones sort of seeing this on the ground. From a funding perspective, you've been raising debt since almost the beginning of your organization.
Yeah.
But this instrument, the way the interactions on the ground has changed, be helpful to really share with the audience, what is that like from the affordable private school perspective? The end recipient, so to speak, of the capital that's coming in, how is this changing the way they are engaging with you, engaging with the larger market in general?
Yeah, sure. Our business is lending, so as it is, we were doing lending. Now, top of it, if you are asking somebody or if you are telling somebody that, okay, now not only I am giving you the money, for affordable private schools, the definition is if a school is charging fees of less than 1,200 rupees per kid per month. So that is affordable in our parlance. The kind of schools which we have, the average fees would be somewhere 500 to 600 rupees per month. Now, for these guys, first important thing is liquidity. Interest rate is later. The void which we have filled is that these guys were not accessing funds. Nobody was giving them money because school is considered as a negative sector or a sector where you can't go and enforce the security that, okay, vacate the premises, I'm going to lock it down. It will have some social issues. Now, where the liquidity is a constraint, top of the liquidity, we are saying not only liquidity I'm providing, you can actually benefit in terms of interest rate if you are doing X, Y, Z. In this particular case, our case, we said, we will measure your schools for 3rd standard, 5th standard, and 7th standard students on their English and mathematical capabilities. Now, it is the fact that if your English and mathematics are fine, that the chances that you'll do well in life are high. So, and typically these schools, they lack into English and mathematics. So that's why these two subjects were chosen. Now, how they received this product was received very well by our schools because as I've said earlier also that not only we preponed, similarly our schools. Now we have to remember these affordable private schools, the owner or say promoter of this school, he is a guy whose bread and butter is from this school. Now he's earning his monthly salary or say income from the school only. And if you say that not only you have to improve quality of education, so he will start thinking, can I pass on this fees to the parent? Now if he cannot pass on this fees to the parent, he definitely would say, okay, let me postpone this decision. So this kind of initiative has actually helped in terms of again preponing that decision that, okay, let me think today about the quality of education. Who is going to eventually benefit? These kids of 3rd, 5th, 7th standards. Now, it is just a random sampling that, okay, we have taken one section or two sections and again we'll go back after 2 years, same kid, they would have gone to 5th, 7th and 9th standard. We are going to test them and see have they actually improved. Now, these schools, they have open-heartedly said that yes, we were postponing this decision because of paucity of funds. Now we would like to do this. How? So not only we have said that, okay, you will get this funding. Now we are also asking them how to ensure that you actually get 10%, not 5%. So we are saying that, okay,
so we are trying to suggest them. In fact, the report which was shared with them by one of the company, GMI, who rated the school, has also given them point that these are the areas where you lack, improve those areas, and maybe you will able to get 10%. Now, these kind of initiatives, again, we'll be taking more and more with the schools. Currently, they are 100 because it's a pilot. So in terms of receiving, I would say, yes, it was well received by these schools. One or two schools always they said, what's in there for you? But those we explained that we also want customer engagement. Our customers, we would like that they are satisfied. Not only loan, we want to give them value-add services also. So from us, this is a value-add services which we have given, and they have taken it very well.
Thanks, Neeraj. I have a bunch of more questions, but I'm cognizant of time since we have to try and wrap up around 3:30. So maybe what we can do is open it up to the audience for a few questions, and then we can then continue the discussion. So what I'd like is, there are 2 mics. If you have questions, we can just line up. We'll take maybe 3 questions at a time, address those, and if we have time, we'll take more as well. So does anybody have questions for the panel? If there aren't any questions, I'm happy to continue asking questions because I have a lot.
Sorry, I was just trying to slow down if others had a question. So this kind of discussion, you have all given completely different models. And the problem that somebody like me faces who's been 35 years in development is that with all this private sector growth in markets which are for the poor, this troubles me a little bit at one level because we try to absolve the state of its own responsibility towards education. Right? So as the private, I'm not saying it's an either or, but it still troubles me because in India what we do is also work, do public-private partnerships with government schools. So rather improve quality of government schools than improve quality of private schools and enable them to become better. So I'm not saying that it should be an either or, but I think that on the broader level, the investments in these kind of private market related, in the market paradigm growth is far more than in the government related growth. World Bank used to do that. World Bank used to fund governments for education. What has happened, that we are now discussing all these instruments for, same with health. My problem is, why aren't we investing in government facilities and their improvement and looking more and more at pricing and profits, bottom of the pyramid thinking.
Since the World Bank was mentioned in that, I think I can try to pick that up. You're absolutely right. At the end of the day, social issues are a public sector responsibility. And one of the great things about this type of tool is when governments get behind it, and this is what we're seeing in the developed countries, definitely in the UK, where it first was initiated, in the United States, where it's being done at all levels of government right now. What they're seeing is 2 things. One is the governments in these countries don't need money. That's not their issue per se. They can raise money every day in the UK or the US. But what they're seeing, first of all, is better focus on outcomes. 1, and 2, more accountability. Because we all know there's a lot of people trying to do well, but they're not doing that well. So the one thing, again, with the data is governments can really track and get behind it. So in the developed countries, we will see these models move more and more towards these terms we're using, pay for success, where governments are actually paying for better outcomes. And I think that will, in the US, that will really scale quite substantially. The challenge here, of course, is, in other developing countries, is the economic resources of government. And I think you mentioned, what about the World Bank and other players like that? The World Bank has not yet been active in impact type financings. We have a few mechanisms, but not quite what we're talking about here. I am been working on them for some time with inside the bank, and I do believe in the next year or so we'll start seeing the bank go to governments and say, let's work together and build this. There are two types of impact bonds for anybody that's been following it. There's one called the social impact bond, and then there's another one called a development impact bond. Very quickly, the difference between them is a social impact bond is paid for by the government, and a development impact bond is paid for by some type of development agency or philanthropic organization. I'm actually very cautious on development impact bonds because in these situations, if government is not behind them, then the long-term sustainability is questionable. So even if governments take a portion of the risk in these blended structures, the better for everybody because they learn, and of course they ultimately do have substantial resources, and it is really about redirecting the resources by using impact measurements, which to date they have not actively used. Does that kind of get close to where your question is?
I'd just like to add to the point around development impact bonds in government. I think absolutely. A lot of the work that we're doing with these structures by their nature is they have to be 3 to 5 year contracts at the beginning because that's how long a funder will support a program. But that doesn't mean we wait and say at the end of the 3 years, so now what? It's making sure that at the very beginning there's engagement with the government, either whether they're funding or they're making a commitment to fund, or there's a clear pathway to sustainability in the private sector. So I think just to echo that.
My name is Jamuna. I work in PwC. I lead the inclusive markets work in financial services here in India. And I'm coming back to her train of thought, which has been bothering me also for a while. One is, of course, the government absolving itself of its responsibility of taking care of basic needs of the people, which is education and health. But my other question, and that is coming from what the discussions which I'm hearing, is that you are paying for success. Who is really going to be then funding for, when anyone is trying anything new, how sure are you that it's going to be successful? I mean, if everything is going to be successful 100%, then you're not trying anything new, right? So who's going to pay for that? If governments don't pay for it, if the World Bank and such likes don't pay for it, who's really going to be doing that? And will that really nurture creativity, innovation? Because if it's all success-based, I don't know where that's going to go.
Okay, who wants to take that one?
See, as far as who is going to observe, one is the development organizations or say NGOs who are really related to this, number one. Number two, again, it's not that we, for example, as a company, we are not going to do this. We definitely would be doing this. The government has said that, okay, 2% of the profit you have to keep aside for CSR. Now this CSR, how to deploy this, and same thing, like what MSD has done with us. Some other company could have done this with us, they could have given us money. Now, important thing here is that why this private funding is happening to the private institutions and why not government, etc. One, government doesn't listen, they don't need money from private guys, they have enough. Two, say if this help, I mean, we have to distinguish between grant and the help. I mean, grant is that you give the money and forget. Now, we want anything to be on a sustainable basis. The money which you are giving should also be used not only by ISFC, maybe by one more ISFC, two more ISFC. So how that would happen is, if I pay back the money to them after I get my purpose out. Now, that is how these private players would be getting the money, and of course, it has to be a sustainable basis. They also need to have some money back. Government, for example, in school, because I'll talk about the schools, there are close to 14 lakh schools in India. 10 lakhs are government schools. Their infrastructure are far better than the private schools. But still, 40% of the kids goes to private schools, not because of the infrastructure, but because of education, quality of education. Because if the very basic purpose of going to school is defeated, the parents are very, they need education. They have seen that education can change the lives. They have seen that they are illiterate, but they would have seen their peers. He got studied, and now he is doing well in the life. So the parents are sending to the private education guys, and these private guys again, they are, they lack some portion. Development organizations or foundations like MSDF plays a good role, and the money definitely, I would say grant is not the right mechanism. Then I would say the loan portion. This is what, in my personal opinion, because grant is just one-way traffic. You give it and forget it. It's not going to help long-term issues. I mean, if I could.
I just rephrase that question. I think it's a good question. But the way I would phrase it slightly is that when should you not use this instrument? I don't think anyone on this panel is advocating that this is the only type of funding. And there's a lot of examples, and one example we're talking about is where innovation is key. So I mean, maybe I would just open it up to the panel to say, when would you not want to use this instrument, as opposed to, because we've talked about when we should use it.
You've raised a very important question, and Rahil has framed it very interestingly, which is we do need to continuously innovate. We don't have all the answers. I think the way I would frame this, first of all, is that in the role of government in this is government's role is generally not to be taking substantial risk with taxpayers' monies, and those, their job is to make social and educational and health outcomes accessible to all and of quality and reliability. So that's where these programs can be very, very helpful. But to your question about innovation, what is happening is the philanthropies like the Dell Foundation today are picking up the role of government because government's not stepping in and doing the long-term issues of access and quality and programs. So if I have a vision for this, is we get governments doing what you both have kind of framed and get the philanthropy back towards funding what they're really, really good at, which is innovation. Let them take the risk, let them come up with new ideas, and then let government learn from that and embed them, as people have been saying here, into measurable programs. But these types of programs, you're right, they're not really perfect. They can be used if everybody's got their eyes open for highly innovative programs. But for the most part, they're really good at scaling things that are showing impact, that have capable organizations to deliver them, be it public sector or private sector, and taking them to scale and sustaining them over a period of time. That's where they've become really good. Less so, again, for purely innovative ones, but maybe it frees up the money to do that is the hope there.
Yeah, just to touch on sort of the 2 points around, I think, the role involving government and then the role of the private sector. While we're talking a lot about financing here, I think I said earlier, this financing is just a means to an end, and the end is better outcomes. This is not about just financial flows and we have a new financial tool. And when we start looking at an issue area, we do exactly that, and we try and understand what are the barriers to the outcomes we're trying to achieve. And if looking at it, it is clear that it is a systemic issue, then this is not the answer. So that we have to be really clear on when we're using the right approach and where the challenge is. And what we tend to find is if there's a situation, as I said, where governments or donors might be funding new textbooks, new classrooms, learning outcomes aren't getting better. An example, for example, we've seen a lot in the UK is the government incurs a lot of the costs of poor social outcomes, whether it be people going through the prison system, welfare, housing, sickness. They're incurring the existing costs of the negative outcomes. They don't have the financial capacity or the ability, the skill to invest in what might be preventative, very effective outcomes, very effective interventions. By a third party, a private investor coming in and saying, well, we'll take the risk, we'll fund it up front and underwrite the cost, you pay us back if it's successful. That then allows the government, they're only funding if they actually save the money they would have spent otherwise. So this is an opportunity to support governments do what they do better. We would certainly never, in terms of when we say we shouldn't use this, it's when this is actually more of a systemic issue that needs addressing at that level, or also if it's a government looking for an opportunity to cut costs and absolve responsibility, and that was when we wouldn't work on a transaction. So in this case, what we're trying to do is take the private sector capital and really use it to support the delivery organisations. So results-based financing, in particular within development, is not new. But by using this structure, you bring in the investor at the beginning and they underwrite the cost. And what we found is that sounds like a really small tweak to traditional results-based financing. It makes a big difference behaviorally. Because if you just give the delivery organization all of the financial risk, then you want to encourage them to innovate and try new things and adapt. They're so worried they're going to lose money and can't survive. If you bring in an investor who partners with them, who supports them, not just financially, but also through the program, collecting data, they can help to really help them to deliver better. So in this case, what we're trying to do is to harness the private sector capital to drive better outcomes for the people that we're trying to support. So I know it can come across that we're just talking about finance, but the intent is there, I promise.
So which part of Goldman Sachs funded the project you were talking about, and why did they do it? What was their motive to do it?
Goldman Sachs manages billions of dollars of funds on behalf of individuals and companies that put money. So the particular monies actually came out of, interestingly, their traditional housing group, in this case, that was used to financing low-income housing in the U.S. But basically, those monies that they have are ultimately coming from high net worth individuals that are looking for investments. So they have, at that time, a $100 million fund that was specifically for doing socially minded investments with a return intention to it, but not necessarily that return was the only driver to it. So that was the intent. So they were actually meeting the needs of their clients. And that was what I was saying earlier. There is a very large change, and there's been some very good research done on this about an emerging class of high net worth or even the average individual now willing to say, I would like to see my investments have some social outcome. I mentioned Rang Day earlier, out of Bangalore again. That's exactly where all their monies, they're 500,000 rupees. Sorry, I probably shouldn't be using those numbers right now. But they're using small denominations investments that are coming from just the average person. So we're seeing this capital come across from a very wide breadth of people that are tired of just seeing pure financial returns, but also very socially minded with what they're doing with their monies.
Hi, I'm Hari from Rao Bank. I represent Rao Bank Foundation. And my question is that all these impact financing models, of course, assume that you can measure the impact. Now, given the difficulty which you often get in measuring impact, whether it's getting the quality, the quantity, the relevance of data, so does this kind of instrument necessarily lend itself to certain areas such as, say, education or health, where the outcome is monitorable? And given that collecting data, measuring impact is an expensive affair, who's going to pay for it? So in these impact-linked financing models, what we would like to understand is that who pays for the impact, and how measurable, what kind of intensity of measurement are you looking at, because it's going to be linked to returns that the investor is going to ask for. So that's the kind of thing you would understand.
So that's a fair question, and we were actually discussing this in the morning. If you were to ask me, I would think about scale, which is very important, because I think some of the questions were around how do you support innovation and all. Ultimately, we believe in models which are scalable, and incrementally we are seeing development funds or foundation funds coming in and saying, we'll give you a grant, but only for the initial part. It has to be a sustainable model, right? So the way we think about it is, you have to find the right institutions and back them, and limit the post-investment measurability to a limited extent. If you go too much deep into it, it becomes difficult to scale. So that's what we believe in. Like I gave you an example on affordable housing. There could be specific examples within subsectors in each sector, and impact to that extent, you will find these 5-6 sectors are the ones which essentially lead to impact funding, right? So I would typically have an opinion that you should have a predetermined, specific, standardized parameters so that you can kind of attract more money.
It actually gets a little even more fine than that, because I'll give you an example. In health, tuberculosis treatment would be a very good one, very measurable outcome to there. Community health services, on the other hand, which are much more about maternal care and broader, and the outcomes, can take a couple of years, if not longer, for the development of a young child, are a little more difficult to measure. So even within health, you could say health would be a great sector. you would probably argue that the first ones you would work on are very tangible ones like a tuberculosis type treatment. You can design something around maternal care, we're working on that, but it's a little harder in terms of the ability to directly assess that this program came up with these outcomes and isn't due to other factors. But basically anything, at the end of the day, anything that's measurable works very well to any of these. So it's just what measurement you're willing to work with. But behind that is the data. And I think you're alluding to that. Is one of the things that we hope happens with this is that any of the programs we funded, a material portion of the monies go to the organizations that are running these programs around their data management systems. Matter of fact, the very first one done in the UK by Social Finance, credit to them, the first year they spent was building a data system amongst the different service providers so that they could share data. And this is the other big change that's happening with this, is that we are getting data to know how well we're treating young children and families, these things.
To answer more specifically and directly, I think that sort of institution and capacity building will be grant-based. If I think of the form of capital required, institution building and capacity building has to be grant-based. I don't think that this could be done purely from a commercial perspective. And the other rule of thumb that I use is that the cost of measurement cannot be higher than the reward incentive. Right? If the reward is, in Neeraj's case, we said 10%, but if he was spending 15% to just measure, I would just rather give that 25% to the school. Why? I mean, your transaction costs have to be managed. And to the point that Drew's making, you may have to invest upfront to have the institutional capabilities that bring the transaction costs down in the future. And that initial investment can be completely a grant. It doesn't need to be something which is impacting finance. It's just a preparation for the next step.
So the question is, to further build on the caution that we have around development impact bonds, on saying that, caution because government isn't there from the very beginning. A counterpoint to that is just like we are saying that government should not go and innovate because they have a higher responsibility, and innovation should be taken to them only when it's proven and it's ready to be scaled on the side of delivery. Just like that, I think the counterpoint is that new financial instruments also should be taken to them when it has been proven. So I think for that reason alone, I would say that these are very important conversations, and there shouldn't be caution just because government isn't. Government shouldn't be involved in some of these very early stage conversations, and I wouldn't say that it should be made contingent upon even trying some of those, because at this point government should stand and watch. The other comment that I had is that sometimes I think that the frame just needs to be shifted in what really are we trying to achieve, the end goal, right? And the process of doing some of these things really well is what is the bigger impact of it than actually having delivered the outcome through it. So for example, in the case of education, there isn't a single delivery organization in India which can solve the problem that government is solving. The smallest state has a few tens of thousands of schools, while the largest private sector delivery organization would be 100, and I can count on my fingertips how many of those are. So clearly, even if all of that was working, the measurement was cheap, we had everything going, there isn't anyone who can come and solve that problem of even delivering that education, right? But the process of saying education is about outcomes, how can you measure them well, how do you prove them, that financing has to be linked to it. The process, the sturdier, the robust, the scientific the process becomes, just the impact of that on education is already showing. And the mass exodus, Neeraj knows it well, from government schools to private schools is just showing that. And that's the reason government is waking up and taking action. Microfinance has experienced a similar phenomena. So I think the frame shifting is not just about, what here and now I'm achieving and can I improve outcomes through this in government, but is also what's the systemic impact that even conversations and innovation and pilots like this can have.
Thanks, Prachi. I think that's a good frame to think about how this instrument is having much more of a systemic change of behavior, and some of these could be just pilots where the government is watching and then reacting for the next sort of maybe a decade. I don't know how long it takes, but they're definitely a slower moving actor than some of the people sitting on the stage. Does anyone want to respond to that comment? Great, thank you so much, everyone. I'll just do, I think it was a wide-ranging discussion, and the challenge of this conversation is that there isn't one type of instrument, right? As one of the comments was that we've talked about so many different flavors. So, the only thing I would say is that, to sum it up, is that it's not an instrument, it's a concept. That it doesn't necessarily need to be a bond, it could be a pay-for-performance structure. At its core element, you're talking about how do you link financial incentives in a transactional way to measurable impact outcomes. And I think if you use that frame, it'll sort of span a bunch of different types of structures that Drew and Katy and Uttam and Neeraj have talked about today. And the other thing that I sort of take away from this is that there is a dire need for intermediaries. For this to get bigger and move faster, you need to have intermediaries that can bring in a lot of capital, source different forms of capital, and then impact the space. So I think the work that social finance is doing is very, very critical to help people like Janalakshmi and others to quickly come on board. And as Neeraj said, the first thing was 4 months, to get that 4 months down to 7 days. So for this to really take off in the kind of sectors where measurement is possible and very objective and clear, I think we need that kind of that intermediary capacity. And I think the last thing that Drew, that you said that I think is very important to recognize is that this instrument has significant leverage capabilities. You're drawing in tremendous amounts of different forms of capital, and not only are you drawing that in and crowding this capital in, but you're focusing it with an outcome in mind, where earlier the ecosystem has been more in terms of probably measuring output. It's changing the discourse and the discussion and pulling in this capital to focus on outcomes and impact, which I think is a great change in the overall ecosystem. As Neeraj is saying, that he's seeing his schools on the ground talk about learning level outcomes, and they're talking about it sooner than even they had planned for, because that's the way the incentive has shaped behavior. So having said that, thank you so much for sitting patiently through a little bit of your tea break as well. I really appreciate the panelists and all the input and thought-provoking discussions we've had, so thank you very much.